Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Our today's session is again a continuation of book 2 of the novel Joseph Andrews, and in today's session we would cover from chapters 10 to 17. Before I start with today's session, I would like to share a review of the previous session. Well, book 2 in total has 17 chapters. However, in the previous session we have covered first 9 chapters, that is from chapter 1 to chapter 9. In that session, we looked at the headings of these chapters, that is from chapters 1 to 9. We discussed important summary points and we generated some critical analysis and discussion of important points related to the events and happenings in these chapters. I also shared with you some important parts of the text, especially openings of some chapters, and the text that is taken from the closing of some chapters was discussed with you. And I used some important parts of the text with reference to add clarity to your understanding of the themes and development of characters, as well as plot and structure development through the novel. In order to prove some points about Fielding's work as a moralist and as a satirist, as well as his art of characterization, I again quoted some parts of the text and generated some discussion points. As far as today's session is concerned, current session presents chapters 10 to 17 from book 2, that in total has 17 chapters. Since we would cover from chapters 10 to 17, we would look at the headings of these chapters, some important happenings in these chapters I would talk about. Again, a few important points of discussion would be raised and I would give critical comments on them. Important parts of text with reference to the themes, development of characters, plot and structure of the novel, etc. would be discussed. Some parts of these chapters would be discussed with reference to Fielding's authorship as a moralist and as a satirist. Again, we would see how different characters develop through these chapters and how Fielding has used his art of characterization to present this development of certain characters. Well, starting with chapter 10 and chapter 11, I would share the headings of these chapters with you as Fielding has used them. The heading of chapter 10 runs as giving an account of the strange catastrophe of the preceding adventure which drew poor Adams into fresh calamities, and who the woman who was owed the preservation of her chastity to his victorious arm. So we were told in the previous chapter that we discussed as the last chapter in the previous session that there was a woman who was saved by Parson Adams, and the woman told that she was traveling to London. Now in this chapter, at the very outset of the chapter, through this heading, Fielding is preparing us to know who this woman is, and maybe at this stage we would be able to make some guesses as well. As far as chapter 11 is concerned, the heading runs as what happens to them while before the justice, a chapter very full of learning. So if Fielding says at the outset in the heading that it is a chapter very full of learning, it means Fielding would be at work as a moralist and as a satirist to give his comments and opinions on certain things, to convey his viewpoint to us, and to fulfill the purpose for which he has mainly written the novel Joseph Andrews, that is to project the themes of affectation, vanity and hypocrisy. Well, here are some important happenings in chapter 10 and 11 of book 2. A group of young bird batters discovers the distraught woman and her rescuer Adams. Adams tries to relate what has happened, but the clever villain interrupts with his own version of the story and tells them that he is a poor traveler who was robbed by a pair of thieves. Again, the simplicity of Parson Adams is counteracted by the clever villain, and we can Understand the simplicity of Parson Adams in the light of the clever attitude of this man, maybe in a far better way. Catching a pair of thieves sounds to be a more attractive sport than catching birds, and so the bird batters march Adams and the woman off to the justice. The resigned Adams, constantly sympathetic towards his companion, misses an opportunity to escape, for when the clerk of the company mentions the possibility of an £80 reward, they all start to bicker about their share. So what we can immediately notice is how Fielding has incorporated the theme of money-mindedness and materialism. Let's see some text on the next slide in this regard. Here is some text from chapter 10 that sheds light on the themes of selfishness and materialism versus virtue. Fielding writes, "Whilst they were on their way, the clerk informed the rest that this adventure would prove a very beneficial one, for that they would all be entitled to their proportions of £80 for apprehending the robbers. This occasioned a contention concerning the parts which they had severely borne in taking them, one insisting he ought to have the greatest share, for he had first laid his hands on Adams, another claiming a superior part for having first held the lantern to the man's face on the ground, by which he said the whole was discovered. The clerk claimed 4/5 of the reward for having proposed to search the prisoners, and likewise the carrying them before the justice. He said, indeed, in strict justice, he ought to have the whole." So you see, you would notice everybody making claims, everybody being selfish, thinking of his share out of that, and thinking of making as much money as anybody could make from all this. Anyhow, Book 2, chapters 10 and 11 continue with some details that I would like to share. As Adams cries in grief, he mentions the name of Joseph Andrews, which leads to the revelation that the woman is none other than Joseph's beloved Fanny, who had heard of Joseph's misfortune, had immediately abandoned the cow she was milking, and set out to find Joseph. So this chapter is important in the sense that we find that the woman who was helped by Parson Adams is actually Joseph's Fanny, and who, as she heard about Joseph's misfortune, she immediately left everything, and from the countryside she started traveling towards London to meet Joseph. However, she met that person on the way, whom she took as a company on the journey, but then she had to face problems, and finally Adams came to rescue her. Though Fanny tries to conceal her passion for Joseph from Adams, who never saw farther into people than they desired to let him, but Fielding, as an omniscient and omnipresent writer, tells us that she loved Joseph very much. Now the text that I have quoted here, Adams never saw farther into people than they desired to let him. Again, we can notice Fielding as a moralist who believes that one should not probe, one should not be curious to dig out things about people. As much as somebody would like to reveal himself or herself or his or her story or happenings related to him or her, that should be considered enough by the other person. And according to Fielding, this is a part of true virtue. Anyhow, chapter 11 continues, where Adams and Fanny are put in a stable while the justice, just returned from a fox chase, finishes his dinner. Afterwards, the justice, being in the height of his mirth and his cups, proceeds to have good sport with them without any regard to the issues at stake. Well, Fielding's criticism on the system of justice came through his personal experience as a magistrate and his personal experience of the systems of law, how they were corrupt and how they were working in a very ill way. And in this chapter again, we see some biographical items, some biographical notes that are incorporated into the text. Let's see some relevant text on the next slide. Well, here is some text from chapter 11 that throws some light on the working of the legal system. The justice, now being in the height of his mirth and his cups, bethought himself of the prisoners, and telling his company he believed they should have good sport in their examination, he ordered them into his presence. They had no sooner entered the room than he began to revile them, saying that robberies on the highway were now grown so frequent that people could not sleep safely in their beds, and assured them they both should be made examples of all the ensuing assizes. After he had gone on some time in this manner, he was reminded by his clerk that it would be proper to take the depositions of the witnesses against them, which he bid him do, and he would let his pipe in the meantime. Whilst the clerk was employed in writing down the deposition of the fellow who had pretended to be robbed, the justice employed himself in cracking jests on poor Fanny, in which he was seconded by all the company at table. Well, while lewd remarks are levelled at Fanny, a witty fellow spies Adam's cassock beneath his greatcoat and taunts him with several lines of Latin. Adams quickly challenges the wit's linguistic mistakes, but to the amusement of the crowd, he has no money to back up his wagger. Meanwhile, the justice orders the clerk to make the metamus without reading a word of the depositions, and the indignant objections from Adams do nothing to prick his conscience. The ill working of the legal system, the cruel attitude of people who had the legal power in their hands towards the poor people, the stereotypical behavior of the justice that reflects the behavior of the people who were working in the field of law at the time of Fielding's writing of the novel, is all presented through this chapter. He, without even having a look at the dispositions, without even having a look at what they said, he just ordered the clerk to make the metamus, and he didn't even bother about them. Here is some more text from chapter 11 that provides some more insights into what happened. Adams then said he hoped he should not be condemned unheard. "No, no," cries the justice, "you will be asked what you have to say for yourself when you come on your trial. We are not trying you now. I shall only commit you to gaol. If you can prove your innocence at size, you will be found ignoramus and so on harm done." "Is it no punishment, sir, for an innocent man to lie several months in the jail?" cried Adam. "I beg you would at least hear me before you sign the metamus." "What signifies all you can say?" says the justice. "Is it not here in black and white against you? I must tell you, you are a very impertinent fellow to take up so much of my time, so make haste with this metamus." So you can notice the arrogant style of the justice. You can also notice how very rudely and arrogantly he says, "What signifies all you can say?" To him, it is not important what Adams says or what he wants to say. And he is not ready to pay any attention to these poor people. He just simply pays a deaf ear to the cries of Adams, who believes that he should be given a chance to present his case, and he should be given a chance to give clarification for all that happened. Anyhow, at this point, the clerk introduces into the evidence Adam's copy of Aeschylus, which is literally and figuratively Greek, to the justice, who mutters darkly about the ciphers. The parson of the parish fares little better with the book, and the justice triumphantly takes the book from Adam's to be Adam's fictitious name. This not only throws light on the shallow learning of the justice, it also Fielding, as a satirist, I would say, it also is used to throw light ironically on what a so-called learned person who was well placed in the legal system was doing to Adams. By chance, a squire in the crowd recognizes Adams, and when the justice hears Adams referred to as a clergyman and a gentleman, he hastily tries to make amends. Again, theme of pretension, theme of affectation is very much clear. No sooner than he comes to know that Parson Adams is a clergyman, and as he is referred by a squire to be a gentleman, of course, the tone of the justice has to change. Adams gives the true account of the whole affair, which the justice believes as readily as he did the first version. Again, this is a very, very sheer kind of satire on the legal system, where the justice who believed in the first version and now he believed in the second version that is given by, you see, the poor Parson Adams. The villain of the episode, however, has quietly withdrawn, leaving the bird batters in a loud, drunken quarrel concerning who would have received the most money had Adams been convicted. So, as such, nobody is worried about, you see, the truth of what happened, or to find out the real thing. Rather, everybody is interested in his his personal material benefits, and they keep on quarreling that if Adams would have been convicted, they would have got a good share of money. This shows selfishness on their part, and this also shows the materialistic approach that they have. Adams takes a drink with the justice, and despite his wise observations on the folly of people who argue vehemently about matters of small import to them, he almost comes to blows with the justice in a debate on the conduct of the arraignment. So what we need to notice is, again, Parson Adams believes in physical valor, and he hardly, you see, avoids this quarrel that again he could have with this justice. Fanny interrupts the dispute when she learns that a young fellow is about to set out for the inn where Joseph's coach has stopped. She and Adams accompany the young man to the inn. This is the point where chapter 11 comes to an end. Important discussion points related to these two chapters revolve around the theme of incompetent clergymen that are presented in these chapters. Parson Trulliber is an example of all the incompetency and corruption in clergy. To provide spice to his satire, Fielding inserts a parody of a knowledge of Latin as well. Fielding was himself a magistrate and had first-hand knowledge of the abuse of common law by those supposed to be on the right side of it. As I have earlier discussed, Fielding's personal knowledge of all this helps us have insights into the corruption in the sphere of law, as this episode is presented in these chapters. My dear students, with this we move on to the next chapter, that is chapter 12 of this book, and the heading of this chapter runs as a very delightful adventure, as well to the persons concerned as to the good-natured reader. So something pleasant is going to happen. Let's see what is that. A storm forces Adams and Fanny to take shelter in an alehouse, and while Adams tests the brew, Fielding gives the reader a portrait of Fanny. Again, art of characterization of Fielding is exhibited through his portrayal of Fanny. She is exquisite, and even her few minor blemishes do not mar the overall effect of her beauty. I think it would be appropriate to read some text about her, because it would provide us insight into Fielding's masterly art of characterization, of pencil sketching or pen sketching the characters. We can almost visualize these characters as he has presented them or depicted them. It also is important to read something about Fanny and her appearance, because she is one of the main female protagonist roles in the novel. With reference to Fielding's art of characterization, here is Fanny's portrayal as it is given in the text of chapter 12. Fielding writes, "Her hair was a chestnut brown, and nature had been extremely lavish to her of it, which she had cut, and on Sundays used to curl down her neck in the modern fashion. Her forehead was high, her eyebrows arched, and rather full than otherwise, her eyes black and sparkling, her nose just inclining to the Roman, her lips red and moist, and her underlip, according to the opinion of the ladies, too pouting. Her teeth were white but not exactly even. The smallpox had left one only mark on her chin, which was so large it might have been mistaken for a dimple, had not her left cheek produced one so near a neighbor to it that the former served only for a foil to the latter. Her complexion was fair, a little injured by the sun, but overspread with such a bloom that the finest ladies would have exchanged all their white for it. Add to these a countenance in which, though she was extremely bashful, a sensibility appeared almost incredible, and a sweetness, whenever she smiled, beyond either imitation or description. To conclude all, she had a natural gentility superior to the acquisition of art, and which surprised all who beheld her. So this is the description that Fielding has given of Fanny, that even small marks or blemishes that she had on her skin, such as that smallpox mark on her chin, they were adding to her beauty instead of destroying that. However, despite this apparent physical beauty, the most important feature of Fanny is her natural gentility, as Fielding has mentioned it. Returning to the narrative, Fielding inserts several verses of a long ballad about love. So a love song is quoted, sung by a sweet-voiced young man in another part of the ale. Now again, maybe chance or fate is going to play some role, because as Fanny is sitting there, she hears some voice coming from the other room in the ale, where some male voice is singing a love song. At this stage, we guess who he is when Fanny faints as the close of the song. Adams, astounded, leaps up, dropping his beloved book of Aeschylus into the fire as he cries for help. The person who comes to rescue in response to these cries is no other than Joseph Andrews. The passionate reunion of Joseph and Fanny embarrasses Fanny in front of Adams, while Adams skips in utmost joy. Well, you would have noticed so far that whenever things start going out of the hands of the main characters, that is Joseph and Parson Adams, nature plays its role and fate plays its role. It is through chance that Fielding as an author brings the things back onto the track. So again, now that Fanny and Joseph are separated, this is the time point where Fanny, as she sits in that alehouse and listens to some male voice singing, we can already anticipate that maybe this is going to be Joseph. And as soon as Fanny listens to the closing of the song, she is able to identify the voice, and with the emotional stress, she faints. Seeing her fainting out, Adams is puzzled, confused, and astounded. She leaps up, and in her effort to get help, he cries, and in all that he has thrown, in that hurry, in that confusion, he has thrown his dear book of classics into the fire. Now, listening to these cries, the person who comes to help, we are pleasantly surprised to see, is Joseph Andrews. Thus, finally, Joseph and Fanny are reunited. There are some other important happenings in the chapter. For example, as Slipslop passes by Fanny, Fanny extends courtesy, but the jealous Mrs. Slipslop exits in a haughty sweep, completely ignoring Fanny's courtesy to her. This is mentioned at the end of chapter 12 by Fielding. Now let us see what are the important aspects of the concluding text of chapter 12. Well, here is the concluding text that is taken from chapter 12, and it provides some insight into Slipslop's personality again. The text runs as, "Then seeing Mrs. Slipslop, she courtesied and offered to advance to her, but that high woman would not return her courtesies, but casting her eyes another way, immediately withdrew into another room, muttering as she went, she wondered who the creature was." So what we mainly notice is that Slipslop pretends as if she has not recognized Fanny. It is not possible, of course, but this theme of pretension on part of Slipslop, as it is brought into the text, it again highlights one of the purposes of Fielding as a moralist, that is to point out the ills, the vices that are corrupting the society. Slipslop's this behavior towards Fanny provides an opportunity to Fielding as a writer to bring in some moralistic lessons that he wants to share with his readers. So chapter 13 is all about that. The heading of chapter 13 states, a dissertation concerning high people and low people, with Mrs. Slipslop's departure in no very good temper of mind, and the evil plight in which she left Adams and his company. So in the chapter, we as a reader are prepared to see how Mrs. Slipslop responds further to Fanny and what happens. Well, here are some important summary points from Book 2, Chapter 13 that I would like to share. The act of ignoring Fanny on the part of Slipslop is a desirable snub, and to explain Slipslop's behavior, Fielding explains his theory about the two classes into which people are divided, that is, the high class and the low class. What Fielding has to say about that, let us see some relevant text. Well, this is the text from chapter 13 where a justification of Slipslop's behavior is also given, and Fielding as a moralist presents his point of view as well. The text goes as follows. Be it known then that the human species are divided into two sorts of people, to wit, high people and low people. As by high people, I would not be understood to mean persons literally born higher in their dimensions than the rest of the species, nor metaphorically those of exalted characters or abilities. So, by low, I cannot be construed to intend the reverse. High people signify no other than people of fashion, and low people those of no fashion. So, the division of high and low is the division of people of fashion and people of no fashion, according to Fielding. Now this word fashion hath by long use lost its original meaning, from which at present it gives us a very different idea. For I am deceived if by persons of fashion we do not generally include a conception of birth and accomplishments superior to the herd of mankind, whereas in reality nothing more was originally meant by a person of fashion than a person who dressed himself in the fashion of the times, and the word really and truly signifies no more at this day. Now the world being thus divided into people of fashion and people of no fashion, a fierce contention arose between them, nor would those of one party, to avoid suspicion, be seen publicly to speak to those of the other, though they often held a very good correspondence in private. So some important summary points that are related to the same division that Fielding has made in terms of high and low class people, or people of fashion and people of no fashion. I would like to share that all these classes, according to Fielding, are composed of the fashionable and the unfashionable, the latter pursuing and aping the former all the way up the social ladder, while the former disdain their inferiors. Adams, who is ignorant of these intricacies of social mechanism, follows Slipslop and tries to jog her memory about Fanny, whom Slipslop now pretends to even not remember. Again, the pretension of Slipslop in contrast to Parson Adams' simplicity becomes very, very prominent. While Adams praises Fanny's chastity, Slipslop in her jealousy rebukes him for his violence in rescuing Fanny and criticizes Fanny's character. Themes of selfishness, themes of appearances versus true virtue, and themes of pretension and affectation are very, very clear through this chapter. Continuing book 2, chapter 12, chapter 13, I would say that outside the storm is now over, and when it comes to resuming the journey, Joseph Andrews refuses to travel on without Fanny. While Adams dozes by the fire, Joseph and Fanny declare their love for each other, so Joseph wakes Adams up to ask him to marry them. However, Adam refuses to do so by stressing the importance of publishing the banns and asks Joseph to wait. The three of them prepare to start their journey as it is dawn now. However, some delay is caused by need for payment of 7 shillings on their part, because this is the money that they are short of, the payment that they are supposed to make for their stay. Adams is suddenly struck by an idea, and he asks the hostess if there is a clergyman in the parish. As he comes to know that there is one, Adams joyfully leaves Fanny and Joseph, telling them that he has a brother in the parish who will pay the bill. Of course, Fanny and Joseph believe in him. He assures them that he will soon return with the much needed money. Some important points of critical analysis that I would like to share are the following. The reunion of Fanny and Joseph brings out the truly charitable nature of Adams. He is extremely joyful at the happiness of others, and you would have noticed that in his true happiness and extreme joy, actually, he jumped up in such a way that he not only has thrown his dear classic into the fire, but also he is jumping with joy. There are certain themes that are presented through these chapters. The theme of affectation repeatedly comes in through the chapters of this novel. So again, the theme of affectation is stressed in this part of the text. In contrast to Adam's sincerity, we can see the affected snobbishness of Slipslop. Her jealousy and hatred of Fanny reminds us of Lady Booby's behavior towards Betty. If you can recall from book 1, the initial chapters, you can recall the episode where Joseph Andrews was thrown out of the service of Lady Booby, and one of the reasons, as Slipslop poured into the ears of Lady Booby, was that he was involved with Betty. So feeling jealous of Betty, Lady Booby did that. The theme of pretension is also very prominent here. The imitation of fashion throughout the social scale provides Fielding with material for his lengthy digression. He, as a moralist, discusses the theme in detail. Another theme that is recurring through the novel is that of simplicity, and Adams is an incarnation of this simplicity. Adams' joy at the reunion of both the lovers, his insistence on the proper rites and forms for the wedding of Joseph and Fanny, and his firm belief that his Christian brother will help him, all this reaffirms his simplicity. Fielding, again, as a moralist, through the mouthpiece of Adams, conveys to his reader his firm belief in not only in the active virtue, but also in those proper rites and forms where he asks them to publish the banns of their marriage. As the chapter closes, we have the feeling that the parson's simplicity over money matters is about to get him into trouble once again. My dear students, with this we move on to the next 2 chapters, that are chapters 14 and 15. Before we explore the text of these chapters and we look into the details, let us have a look at the headings of these chapters. The heading of chapter 14 runs as an interview between Parson Adams and Parson Trulliber, whereas the heading of chapter 15 goes as an adventure, the consequence of a new instance which Parson Adams gave of his forgetfulness. So through a comparison and contrast of Parson Adams and Parson Trulliber, we as readers can anticipate we are going to get a lot from Fielding as a moralist and as a satirist, of course. Whereas chapter 15, again, as the heading tells us, would provide us some instances of Parson Adams' forgetfulness, so we anticipate some humor that would be created on the part of Fielding. Starting about the important summary points of chapter 14 and 15, I would say that in chapter 14, we find that Adams arrives at the house of Parson Trulliber, who is more of a farmer than a clergyman. For his wife runs a dairy while he sees to the pigs, whom he resembles in size and nature, as Fielding himself comments. So if you remember in chapter 13, towards the end of chapter 13, when that is Parson Adams, Joseph and Fanny wanted to continue their journey again, they were stopped because they didn't have enough money to pay their bill. They lacked 7 shillings to pay the bill, and Adams thought of a solution at which he was very, very cheerful, and the solution was that his brother clergyman in the parish would help him pay the bill. Adams then left Fanny and Joseph, telling them that soon he would return with some money. Now he arrives at the house of Parson Trulliber, who is the parson in the parish, and as Fielding introduces him, we are told by Fielding that he is more of a farmer than a clergyman. So the worldly aspects of his personality are more important. He has pigs that he rears and he sells them, and Fielding tells that he resembles in size and nature with these pigs. So very negative connotations are attached through these images to the personality of Trulliber, and later on we would see that he has those negative traits in his personality. Let us read some text that is relevant to this point, and let's have it on the next slide. Here is some text from chapter 14 that is about Parson Trulliber. Fielding writes, Parson Adams came to the house of Parson Trulliber, whom he found stripped into his waistcoat with an apron on and a pail in his hand, just come from serving his hogs. For Mr. Trulliber was a parson on Sundays, but all the other 6 might more properly be called a farmer. So you can notice the tone of Fielding as a satirist, that he is parson on Sundays only. Fielding continues, he occupied a small piece of land of his own, besides which he rented a considerable deal more. His wife milked his cows, managed his dairy, and followed the markets with butter and eggs. The hogs fell chiefly to his care, which he carefully waited on at home and attended to fairs, on which occasion he was liable to many jokes, his own size being with much ale rendered little inferior to that of the beasts he sold. He was indeed one of the largest men you should see, and could have acted the part of Sir John Falstaff without stuffing. Add to this that the rotundity of his belly was considerably increased by the shortness of his stature, his shadow ascending very near as far in height when he lay on his back as when he stood on his legs. His voice was loud and hoarse, and his accents extremely broad. To complete the whole, he had a stateliness in his gait when he walked, not unlike that of a goose, only he stalked slower. I would like you to compare this description of the character of Parson Trulliber with the description that was given of Fanny. And just by looking at their descriptions, by reading their descriptions, we can well imagine the characters. Well, dear students, at this point I would like to share some text from chapter 14 that is providing more insights into Trulliber's character. The text goes like this. His wife, who informed him of Mr. Adams's arrival, had made a small mistake, for she had told her husband she believed there was a man come for some of his hogs. This supposition made Mr. Trulliber hasten with the utmost expedition to attend his guest. He no sooner saw Adams than, not in the least doubting the cause of his errand to be what his wife had imagined, he told him he was come in very good time, and that he expected a dealer that very afternoon, and added they were all pure and fat, and upwards of 20 score apiece. Adams answered he believed he did not know him. Yes, yes, cried Trulliber, I have seen you often at fair. Why, we have dealt before now. I warrant you. Yes, yes, cries he, I remember thy face very well. So again the theme of selfishness, where you see Trulliber is showing all the courtesy and he is quick enough to attend him, that is Parson Adams, for the simple reason that he believes that he is there to buy his hogs. On the other hand, the theme of pretension is also very, very clear, where Trulliber pretends that he remembers his face. Anyhow, there are important incidents and happenings in chapters 14 and 15 that are as follows. Since Trulliber thinks that Adams has come to buy some of his hogs, he receives him with great enthusiasm. Adams is so much confused at this mistaken enthusiasm that in confusion he takes hold of a pig's tail. The pig leaps up and throws Adams into the mire. While Adam cries, Trulliber is amused by the incident and asserts that his wife is to be blamed for the misunderstanding. Once inside and cleaned up a bit, Adams reveals who he is and what he has come for, that is money. Trulliber's tone suddenly changes. We can notice the theme of money-mindedness and selfishness at work. His hypocrisy is very evident. Adams is no clergyman but a vagabond, he roars, and at the same time berates his poor wife that why she allowed him to come in. When Adams calmly tells Trulliber that to him he is not a true Christian because he doesn't actively practice charity, Trulliber doubles up his fists and is ready to fight over the issue. But to our surprise, Adams is not provoked and leaves with the remark that he is sorry to see such men in religious orders. Well, here again Parson Adams becomes a mouthpiece of Fielding, who is actually sorry to see such corrupt clergymen in the religious orders. Though he does not receive, that is Adams does not receive any help from Trulliber, and Trulliber is ready to fight and gets very angry, Adams is not provoked and he avoids any quarrel and just giving his calm comments on Trulliber and his attitude, he leaves. Anyhow, Parson Adams returns to Joseph and Fanny without any money, but the hostess surprises them all by allowing them credit and wishing them a good journey. Not only they are surprised, but I would say we as readers are also surprised why she is being so nice. However, her generosity is not genuine. She has misunderstood Joseph and believes Adams to be the natural brother of Trulliber. Because when Adams was going to Trulliber, he said he was going to meet his brother to get some money. By that what he meant was the brother in divinity or brother in faith or brother in Christianity, Dini Bhai. But the hostess took it literally and she thought maybe he was his actual brother. So again it is out of her selfish approach that she is showing all that generosity. As they are about to leave, Adams remembers that he left his greatcoat and his hat at Trulliber's house. So another incident of Adams' forgetfulness is again here, and when he came from Trulliber's house back, he left his coat and hat there, which of course is to be fetched now. The hostess offers that she will go to Trulliber's place to fetch these for them. As she goes there, reality is revealed to her, because not only she has to face the angry temper of Trulliber, who rebukes her a lot as well, but also you see she comes to know that Parson Adams and Trulliber, both the Parsons, are not real brothers. So this naturally changes her attitude towards Parson Adams, Fanny and Joseph. As soon as she comes back, she demands her money. The generosity that she was showing, the positive attitude that she was showing, the good wishes that she had for them, everything now has changed. At this point of tension, chance plays its role as a fellow traveler in the inn who has overheard the hostess's hard remarks. He takes Adams aside and asks him how much he needs. A loan is made by him to Adams, Fanny and Joseph, and Adams, Fanny and Joseph are saved by the goodness of this poor peddler. Again, a very important thing with reference to Fielding's beliefs and Fielding's concept of true virtue, that always help comes from the poor. After telling the peddler where to call to be repaid, the travelers leave. So again they are on their way. Well, doing a critical analysis of these chapters, I would say that the subject of these chapters is true charity. Trulliber is a bore, the worst of the 6 incompetent parsons we would come across in Joseph Andrews. His concerns are very much with this world, and he has no feeling for his guest either as a man or as a fellow parson. He bullies his wife unmercifully, and worst of all, he is entirely ignorant of the meaning of charity. That is one of the major themes of religion, Christianity, that he believes in. I know what charity is better than to give to vagabonds. This is what he says to Parson Adams. He rages to Adams about his appearance, commenting sarcastically upon his shabby cassock and his lack of a horse. For him, the dignity of the cloth has a literal meaning only. Fielding as a writer mocks the surface knowledge of Trulliber as a clergyman, who interprets the Christian doctrine of dignity of the cloth in a very, very superficial way and just looks at the literal meaning of that. The nature of his hypocrisy links him to that other odious parson, that is Barnabas, and both men ignore the importance of good works. Trulliber indeed does nothing to help Adams, and his own attitude is echoed throughout his parish. That is why maybe the woman at the inn was eager to support Adams, because she was afraid of this person. Well, as we come across this kind of attitude of Trulliber, we are reminded of Adams' criticism of George Whitefield's detestable doctrine of faith against good work, and again the theme of active virtue versus the Christian doctrine or the Christian beliefs is very much emphasized. The hostess is dominated by the worldly patronage of Trulliber, and her hypocrisy has the stamp of her master. Her comment that people should not pretend to be what they are not is an ironic one, as Trulliber's claim to know what charity is equally ironic. It is only the poor peddler who knows the true nature of charity. As with the postilion who offers his greatcoat to the battered Joseph, if you remember, that was in Book 1, Chapter 12, society has not been kind to this truly compassionate man. In the first chapter, the postilion helped the naked Joseph by offering his coat. Here in this case, again, the money comes from a peddler. It is always the lower class of the society, the poor class of the society, not fashionable. What Fielding has mentioned them as are the people who always come up with some charity, with some kind of help. Whereas the upper class, the so-called what Fielding terms as the fashionable class, they only have their hypocrisy and their criticism to offer. Well, Fielding uses his art as a writer of humor as well, and you would find a lot of humor actually in these chapters. Actually, Parson Adams' visit to Trulliber's place, how in confusion he gets hold of the tail of one of the pigs, how he falls in the mire and gets all his clothes dirty. All this is handled very masterly by Fielding. The handling of Adams' confrontation with Trulliber shows Fielding's artistry at his best. There is first of all the warm humor of Adams' simplicity and unfortunate tumble into the mire. And we have already witnessed as readers the episode of Hog's Blood in the previous part, where Mrs. Slipslop was confused to see it as Adam's blood. The innocence of Adams is beautifully compounded into a classic reversal as Trulliber realizes that far from being paid money, he is being asked for it. So what I would say is that Fielding as a satirist and as a humor writer combines both these skills to create these chapters. Fielding's successful use of the character of Trulliber's wife is also important, because he successfully uses Trulliber's wife to lend an extra dimension to the conflict between Trulliber and Adams. And Trulliber, you would have noticed, continuously keeps on rebuking his wife for wasting his time and energy. The farcical tone is there too, and especially the way in the opening part of the chapter Fielding describes Trulliber, it is very much farcical. Dear students, this leads us towards the last two chapters, that is chapter 16 and chapter 17 of book 2. As far as the heading of chapter 16 is concerned, it says, a very curious adventure in which Mr. Adams gave a much greater instance of the honest simplicity of his heart than of his experience in the ways of this world. Whereas the heading of chapter 7 runs as follows. A dialogue between Mr. Abraham Adams and his host, which by the disagreement in their opinions seemed to threaten an unlucky catastrophe, had it not been timely prevented by the return of the lovers. So let's see what happens in these two chapters. As towards the end of the previous chapter, you would have noticed that now they are, that is Fanny, Adams and Joseph are planning to start their journey again. So once again they are on the road, and the travelers meet a gentleman who appears to be perfect in openness and magnanimity. He invites them to share some refreshment with him in the inn of the parish. There he owns a large mansion and offers Adams to live in this particular parish. Apart from this generous offer, the gentleman also suggests that they avail themselves of his hospitality for a couple of days. Adams, of course, is very much overcome by all this, but no sooner have Adams, Joseph and Fanny accepted this offer that the gentleman suddenly remembers that his housekeeper is away, so maybe he would not be able to offer that generosity to them. Interestingly, next morning he also finds himself unable to provide the horses he had promised. Well, Adams is very much disturbed by the way this good-natured gentleman is abused by his servants. However, Joseph suspects his sincerity and is more concerned about how they are going to pay the bill for their night's lodging at the inn. However, soon it is confirmed by the host that Joseph's suspicions about the gentleman's generosity and sincerity are true. The host also relates previous examples of the emptiness of this gentleman's promises. Again, I would say themes of pretension and of affectation are there. This vain person has a lot to boast about his self and his generosity, and he offers them not only stay there but also he promises to give them horses to travel, but very soon he withdraws from all that, and it is confirmed that this is habitual about this gentleman. These chapters actually present Fielding as a moralist again. He presents ideas related to traveling, trade and other aspects of life through the discussion of Adams and the host. The host claims that experience is the best teacher and extends his argument to defend the practice of the trade, which he claims provides clothes, wine and other necessities of life. Adams has a very different perspective, and these things to Adams are luxuries, not necessities. Fortunately for the peace of all, Joseph and Fanny, who have been conversing in the garden, interrupt the argument, and all the three of them decide to move. As far as the points of critical analysis based on these two chapters are concerned, I would say again the themes of hypocrisy are presented versus the themes of true charity. Fielding continues to stress these themes, and Adams, being extremely innocent, once again judges people at their face value and is naively ecstatic at the hollow offers of the gentleman, believing that his charity to be of the true primitive kind. However, times prove that it was not so. It is a sign of Joseph's increasing maturity also, that his estimation of the gentleman is more accurate. We can see a lot of development in the character of Joseph. That makes him the real hero of the novel as well. That with the passage of time, he learns and he grows and he matures as a human being. His perception is based on experience, which never seems to remain with Adams. The maturity of Joseph is also to be seen in comparison and contrast to the persistent, I would say, persistent simplicity of Adams. As Adams argues with the host, Fielding presents two kinds of learning. One that is based on books, but the other that is based on the practicality of life. And we understand as readers very clearly that the learning that is based on the books, Adams is an example of that kind of learning, but he is far too away from the real practical life learning. Although Adams convincingly emphasizes the importance of spiritual nourishment, we should remember that the host has just demonstrated the essentially practical nature of charity, in which Fielding believes very strongly and which he has advocated throughout the novel. With this, we come to the end of this part of all our book 2's chapters 10 to 17. And I hope I would have been able to add some clarity to your concepts related to these chapters. To review the current session, I would say that since book 2 has 17 chapters, in this session we have covered from chapters 10 to 17, and we have finished this book. We looked at the headings of these chapters, we mentioned important happenings in these chapters, and important points of discussion were raised and issues were addressed. Also, important parts of text with reference to the themes and development of characters were pointed out. How plot and structure is developed was also discussed at some points. Fielding's role as a moralist and his role as a satirist, as well as his art of presenting humor and incorporating in a way that he not only satirizes on the society but also entertains his reader. All this was discussed with the help of examples that were taken from the text of the chapters. We also looked at the art of characterization of Fielding. We looked at how he has presented different types of characters, such as of Fanny, of Parson Trulliber, of Adams, and how by sketching them successfully he has presented a clear picture to the readers of what kind of characters these are. The development in certain characters, such as in the character, especially I would say in the character of Adams is, especially in the character of Joseph, is shown through the maturity that he gains through the experiences as he is on the road, on his way, and as he is learning from the experiences of life. With this, we come to the end of today's session. As we have finished our book 2 in this session, in the next session, inshallah ta'ala, we would start with book 3. With this, I come to an end. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.